All right. Welcome, everybody. This is the third session for the Indiesky working group. We are focusing on moderation today, and very glad to have everybody here with us. I'm Ted Hahn, one of the folks that's part of the ATProto Community Fund. We've been working with Free Our Feeds to run these Indiesky sessions, focused on how we can grow this ATProto ecosystem and talking about the different needs that we see and the sort of different spaces that people want to kind of grow grow the ecosystem and the atmosphere into. We're talking about moderation today, and very excited for this conversation and the folks who are on the session here. The things that we're basically looking to get out of this is updates. Sort of assessing needs within the ecosystem and being able to share info about what things people are doing and the sorts of opportunities for collaborating and working together further. Let's see. I will drop the notes in again now that I have the recording going. Um, and I'll just give a quick preamble before we start jumping in, which is like, you know, AppProto and the Blue Sky ecosystem are social software, but the internet is kind of social software, and trust and safety is a new-ish term, but we've been moderating communities since literally the first days of the internet. And email. But of course, that has evolved as we have more and more people, more structures, weirder things happening. And the paradigms that we've been using to think about this stuff, some of them still apply, some of them are different when we think about distributed ecosystems and talking about technologies like ATProto. And we've already seen some of the differences in that the structure of the ATProto network has afforded. And that's, one of the things that excites me about this ecosystem is the fact that some of these technologies will enable new types of social dynamics that we just haven't seen before. For example, like being able to do large scale user migration, it's just like not a thing anywhere else. The Mastodon ecosystem is one of the other places that we've seen some of this, but some of these dynamics are going to be new, and we're going to be able to see new and interesting ways that we can build stuff and collaborate together. Okay, I will once again toss out. Can I nominate somebody to help take notes? Lawrence, would you be potentially willing?
I'm honestly trying to cook while listening in, so
Okay,
I'm
no
sorry.
worries. Yeah,
I
you're
can take
good.
notes.
Yes, please. Yeah, just looking for somebody. Of course, we're gonna have the transcript here, so it can be fairly high level, but we're just trying to capture some of the topics, questions, and things down below in the bottom here. So, thanks very much. Um, so, we're kind of picking up off of some of the prompts that we talked about last time. So we're talking about PDS infrastructure, what hosting that meant, and then also what app developers were worried about and concerned about when doing moderation. But within those concerns, I want to kind of break it up into two different things, right? There are what do you need to run an app or run a community? And then also, what does it mean to run a community in some of these social spaces and the things that Blue Sky gives us? And I'm glad that Clinton and Rudy are here and interested in talking with them about some of the things that I'm super interested in with Black Sky, and that other people are curious about being able to use that as inspiration to build other types of communities within Blue Sky as well. Um, with that, I'm actually going to kick off and say, does anybody have any updates or things that they want to add to the agenda before we dive into some of the questions about that we've already got listed out here? Things that I want to make sure that we hit. Okay. Um, the things that I am going to also toss out is interested in chatting with um, there's one additional dimension to communities, and then responsibilities of building, which is what are community standards that we want to think about, and particularly how does that connect to regulations in different types of spaces? So like US regulation around trust and safety and moderation are different than Canadian or European regulations. And so when we're talking about what standards we're building towards or what we need to consider, the terrain there's going to be different, and there are going to be different constituencies who are going to be interested in different parts of that. So let's kind of do a quick 101 around some of these things, which is like, why are we doing moderation at all? And part of that is let's start with like the really brass tacks piece, which is like there are legal obligations around running platforms, and that is partly borne out by, you know, 2 decades of social networking and social media. And so there are just like straight up laws around child sex abuse material, and law enforcement requests that if you're running an app, you need to be able to respond to these sorts of things. And so you need to think about how you're storing data, what data you are storing, where, and how you are going to respond to when the cops come knocking. And I'm not going to go into like a super deep dive on that, but like you can see things like the cops have become increasingly sophisticated over the years. And you know, coming from the journalism background on my part, right, you can see how this stuff has changed, right? So before, cops were basically useless in anything that had to do with abuse or harassment. They've learned more about how software companies work, and software companies have built tools to help respond to law enforcement requests in part. But there are also things like, uh, you know, Google turning over search results, or geo results, and things like that, where that's actually changed policy within some of these companies. So like Google Maps, for example, does a hard cutoff. They only store 2 years of your data. You can't go back further than that. 2 years of data is still a whole lot, but that's the sort of tension that we think about also when we're talking about like, what are you building? What do you know about your users in part? And how do you act as a good steward for your users? And then on the flip side, when we're talking about the community aspects of this, is like, how do you make sure that your users have a good time while they're using your apps as well? So I want to dive just like straight in on the questions here, and like I'm curious if folks can jump into the document there, and if there are other questions that folks want to toss in around. Oh, I've totally, yeah. Go ahead, toss in other questions here about shared efforts, and then building groups within what we're doing. I have moved these out of order. And even, you know, we've talked about some of the differences between moderation in the European context versus North American context. Is there anybody who wants to jump in on that? I'm curious about if anything's come of the previous conversations we've had. Robin or Sebastian, has there been any movement with the stuff that y'all have been talking about?
Yeah, we've well, we Robin can maybe say something about the legal aspects that we're working on, and I've been talking to a lot of European politicians on during the Republika fair, and to
Actually, quick
uh,
question for you, Sebastian. Can you introduce yourself first and talk about where?
federal
Oh, you've gone a little out.
agencies. Sorry, go ahead. I lost you for like
Yeah, 2
10
seconds.
seconds.
Yep. Could you quickly just introduce yourself as well, so people have some context for where you're coming from?
Maybe Robin
Otherwise,
should
All right.
introduce
Yeah.
him. He has bad signal.
Since Sebastian's been
Yeah.
moderating.
I mean, my signal did as
I don't know
well. Go ahead, Sebastian.
if I lose you guys again, then Robin has to like jump in and talk about me. So yeah, Robin can maybe say something about the legal aspects that we're working on. I talked to like some politicians, some German federal agencies, and presented to them the concept we're working on for the European Union, which is a shared moderation framework for taking the weight off developers' shoulders to hopefully get some commons moderation tool set up over here, which should then at the same time work as an incubator for developers so they can start without having to take care of the moderation. But maybe we'll talk about this later.
Sure, we could talk about it in greater depth once we get to things that folks want to collaborate on and kind of further growth. Robin, is there anything you want to toss in about the efforts?
I mean, first, since Sebastian didn't hear you, I'll introduce him. Sebastian is a really cool guy who's been working on the Flashes app and a number of other ATProto stuff, and he lives in Berlin and has been like working on also this content moderation commons infrastructure. From my side, I'll just throw in a couple of things. We are, and I say we, Free of Feeds, in active conversation with WO, which is a legal agency, so that we can like have like a very solid brief about like what exactly needs to be implemented. Next week, also meeting with people in the Polish government to discuss this, and a week after that in the Norwegian government. And overall, like, you know, obviously I can't commit to anything because I'm not the decision maker there, but there's definitely a lot of interest in this idea of having, you know, jurisdictionally local PDSs and relays and infrastructure in general, and using that to have like a solid content moderation foundation that, as Sebastian was saying, like then people who want to build can just like use that and not worry about anything else. So fingers crossed that, you know, something's going to unlock maybe this summer, I think.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, it's a super interesting conversation, and it's worth talking about. I mean, I'm not going to put you on the spot and talk about like what are the details here, but I think it's worth bearing in mind a couple of different things, right? When we talk about the Indiesky efforts, broadly speaking, a lot of them have been like blue sky focused, sort of rhetorically. And that actually does matter here when we're talking about things like moderation, because right now, ATProto is largely speaking records that are in the Blue Sky lexicon, and the Blue Sky lexicons are in the Blue Sky PDF or PDSs that use those lexicons are primarily controlled by Blue Sky, and so everything is currently under that umbrella of Blue Sky's moderation and their broader moderation tools too. So it's going to be interesting to see as the conversation develops in Europe and sort of talking about shared infrastructure. How are we talking about moderation? What things are we talking about moderating? Does that continue just being microblogging and the content around that? Because if you think about Blue Sky, right, you've got text posts, you've got blobs, and different sort of services for being able to scan those different things. And Robin, has that come up in the conversations thus far?
It's come up that it's complicated. But like there's some hope that at least you know, for some common stuff like say CSAM, you know, a blob's a blob. Like no matter what lexicon you use, a blob's a blob. And so that already simplifies a significant chunk of, I mean, simplifies. I see it. I don't want to oversell it, but like you can moderate a blob, you know, for any lexicon equivalently. The ability to do more complex, more advanced things that are very lexicon dependent is something that's been mentioned, but like I wouldn't say that we're like far enough along in those conversations to even be like thinking about serious solutions to that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. I mean, like again, some of the stuff is absolutely forming and still developing, and it's interesting to look at the tools that are currently available and what, of course, do the needs assessment more broadly speaking.
Sorry, one thing that's come up as a potential thing, but like again, like in very high level conversation, and not no specific details, would be like an easy way for developers to map their lexicons to like common things that are moderatable. So basically saying like, this is a picture and this is text from like whatever object is in there. And that might be enough to, get somewhere.
Yes. That's complicated too, right? Because as people are creating lexicons are controlled, records are controlled by the user ultimately, right? So you can, of course, always hint or declare types, but people can stick whatever they want in there.
Yeah. I mean, if records are created by the no, but like if records are created by the user in some random lexicon or not following an existing lexicon, then you just like whatever do. How can you do anything with that? But you could declare a way of mapping a lexicon to some common format that's moderatable as a developer when you create a lexicon yourself, right?
That actually might be worth something talking about with the lexicon community folks,
Yeah.
and talking about a metadata hinting layer on top of the sort of intended usage.
Yeah.
So let's make a note about that. That's a great idea.
It could actually be metadata in the lexicon itself, like right.
Yeah, potentially. But we'll see how that kind of goes. Which makes me wish
again very vague, right? This is not.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there are other strategies around that too, right? There are frameworks for annotating code and data types, like Ethicus Fides Lang. And so, like, it's worth sort of exploring different ways that stuff works. So the reason why I also want to talk about the blue sky versus non-blue sky lexicons is, of course, again, that like umbrella that the blue sky handles all of the operations for moderating their blue sky lexicons. And so like it's way easier to build apps that currently are covered and use those lexicons. And the barrier to moving away from that, I think, is like scary for people. And there are definitely teams that are YOLOing it. But talking about that step gap between what it takes to build an app within Blue Sky world versus your own space, I think gets to be a challenge. Are there folks who are currently thinking about that or building towards that? I know obviously Sebastian has been talking about that, and that's part of his interest. So Sebastian, do you want to talk about any of that? And then also curious if anybody else is.
I'll try. Let's see how the signal's holding up. Yeah, I'm currently using the Blue Sky lexicon, and I'm creating sidecar records for stuff that is specific to flashes, which is sort of like an Instagram clone based on ATProto or piggybacking off of the Blue Sky lexicon. So I'm creating sidecar records, and I'm making sure that there's no user provided content in those sidecar records so that they don't have to be moderated. And yeah, I'm like, I'd love to have my own lexicon for several reasons. I'm not sure that I'd switch to like building flashes in its total on an own lexicon, because then I'll lose the whole social graph that I'm interested in with the Blue Sky lexicon. But I definitely want stuff to be separated from Blue Sky. But yeah, that's where moderation comes in, right?
Right. And one of the complicated parts about that, of course, is like who's doing your moderation. And there's a difference between building an app that interfaces with the network versus running a service and being a data host for a whole bunch of users as well. And so I'm interested if there's further conversation about that. I know that, for example, the Skylight folks and Eli at Streamplace have been talking about some of this, and it's worth calling out that their challenges are going to be that these challenges are app and context dependent, right? So even if you're talking about moderating video clips is different than moderating live video streams. And that's going to take different types of gear and different types of operations too, as we're diving into some of this. So like part of this is like who is running your moderation, and do you already have a community that you're working with? Are you as a developer responsible for all of that? What are the sorts of tools, or are you hiring somebody to do those pieces? And so like Sebastian, like if you're currently working inside the Blue Sky lexicons, have you looked at or thought about uh, what whether you're going to do all of the moderation for those yourself, or what the cost or like scope is for doing it in the moderation?
No, I haven't looked at that. I mean, like right now, I think I'm like Blue Sky's using the app, to promote Blue Sky, and I'm using the moderation, so it's like a quick pro right now. But ultimately, I have to moderate it myself. I'd probably use tools and go for that, but I'm not at that point yet because I'm not monetizing this right now.
Yeah.
I've talked to Juliet, who's also on the call, about Roost, which we'll hopefully talk about in a second.
Yeah.
That would be a great candidate to do moderation for flashes, but yeah, ultimately I'm still hoping for some commons moderation tool that we're trying to get set up over here for flashes to be part of that, because that would help immensely.
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. And actually, so maybe that's a good point to pivot onto like the what are models that people are currently using to moderate. So we've got Blue Sky, and they are using their VC funds to go pay a company to do moderation for everything. We've got some community moderation too, and of course Ozone, the labeling system. Blue Sky's got some capabilities built into that. Hi, Brian. And one of the things I was interested in talking about further is like you see people mention Black Sky a lot and that they're doing stuff differently. I think it's worth unpacking that further, because I think that the way that Black Sky works in building a community inside of a broader community is important, and also the structure of like how are they doing all of this, or sorry, how is Rudy Clinton and the team thinking about what it takes to run, be part of a community, serve part of a community, and run it in a sustainable way. Rudy, is there any way that I could ask you to talk about Black Sky a little bit, and like both how it evolved and what tooling you're using?
Sure, such large questions, especially in the chat. I'll just explain my high level view of all this stuff, and then kind of where stuff is at, and then we can talk a little bit about future facing things. So the way in my worldview, there are like three uh three kind of like pillars of moderation, or three kinds of moderation, I would say. There's curation as moderation, which was the first that Black Sky did, which is what I think you had a question somewhere about setting community norms. The easiest example that I give for that is like we remove Wordle posts from the Black Sky feed automatically. Also, uses of the N word with the hard R does not even if you're a member of Black Sky, it doesn't show up in the feed because it doesn't end up in the database. So curation is moderation. It's really like is a part of before having our own app or anything. What are the users seeing? What is being surfaced up to them? Which seems to be the hot button topic of today, with all these journalists writing articles about not seeing the kinds of stuff that they want. But Black Sky often points out that they don't have to see like all the like virulent racists and all that kind of content, partly because of the stuff that we've built. It's also become a kind of defense mechanism in the past. For example, I was doxxed in September, and there was like a big spam attack on the Black Sky feed, and that was because like you could use the tags to add yourself. And so we did there's a lot of like the Blue Sky team, trust and safety team helped out with that. They put in some like behind the scenes stuff to protect the feed, but also we uh I was kind of really working overtime to just like identify the spammers and make sure that they were added to the ban from TV, etc. curation is moderation. Then there's community moderation, which could be manual or automated, but it is the labeling. So it's like supplemental moderation beyond just the platform. That's what Ozone and the labeler services in general on ATProto make possible that are really cool. So that's where we have like our misogynoir and anti-Black harassment labels. I did not launch an Ozone instance for Black Sky right away because I wanted to kind of see how community moderation played out for the first year. Lots of folks who are around at that time are familiar with the kind of projects that burnt out during that period. And so um, that was helpful for me to kind of like learn from other folks' experience of like how to operate the team um, and how to scale things. So we started with just myself and another mod. That first mod, honestly, they burnt out. And that was also a learning experience for me on like the kinds of folks to like I got really specific about the kind of folks to bring in people everyone who's on the team now has had like past experience with some kind of community moderation and like there's someone who like they did trust and safety at TikTok. I'm also in like a community of moderators. What's very unique that is underappreciated about doing community moderation on that protocol is that you can get any and everything reported to you. And there's been some of this stuff has evolved over time. Now you can say like which labels you want reported to you, but when we started, any and everything could get reported to you from anyone. You can't even say like what your audience is. So we couldn't even say like you're a Black Sky user and then you can report to us. So anyone who subscribed to the labeler could report to us. Um, and da, 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 da. Yeah, so it's like it's responding to report. Oh, well, the point I was going to make is that like one of the folks who's a community moderator used to do trust and safety at TikTok, and you kind of only have to deal with short form video, but with at protocol you have to deal with video, image, and text. Um, and some of the text threads, honestly, I think are some of the hardest ones to deal with because you then have to like figure out what part of the conversation, like where the pain points I'm hearing from moderators right now is like having to like investigate into the things. And like Ozone is just like not super friendly for doing that. Um, but yeah, so with that, now we have like like a 9-person team. And with that is like we kept coming into issues where I remember early on, Blue Sky, who are the maintainers of Ozone, they're really building it for themselves, not necessarily for the community mod. So they put their team first. And I was to a point where I was like, we also have a fairly large team. And so like I need the same shit y'all need, like they I have a bunch of people trying to apply this anti-Black harassment label or misogynoir based on some guidelines that we've had to evolve multiple times over the period since we started doing moderation. And uh, and it's complicated. So just the act of doing that, like trying to apply those guidelines and have some kind of level basis. And there's a comment about an appeal system. Ozone has appeals. I don't know if folks realize that. Like you can appeal labels. We get appeals all the time. Those are also hard because now like you have to know you have to come up with a process where this person said something wildly out of pocket. So another thing that I kind of break down for folks is we have intra-community issues and we have extra community issues. Extra community is like outside of Black Sky's community, like members. And so those are the people who we have the automated labeler for that alert us when someone says the N-word anywhere on the network or adds it to their display name or handle or bio, et cetera. Those are really easy. They said the N-word. They're not Black. Label is anti-Black harassment. Pretty simple. Intra-community conflict is harder. These people are having a dispute. Now it escalates. Now someone says something. And now they said something maybe it falls into what could be considered anti-Black harassment or misogynoir. But now they're like, they appeal. They said, I'm sorry. I thought about what I did. Can I be back in the feed? Can I have this label removed? And we have to, that's just a very human process. That's the only time where we then reach back out to a person. So Ozone does not have a way to communicate to the people who are reporting to you or to the people who are being labeled. So I reach out by hand. I go find the person on Blue Sky. I DM them if it's possible and ask and hit them up to have a conversation with them and like figure out some kind of process where like, okay, maybe we take the label off or we add you back. And maybe sometimes I ask them if they even want to be added back into the feed because maybe they became a main character on Black Sky for that day and they don't actually want it. They don't want the visibility again. They'll just use the hashtag whenever they want to be back. So there's all this like human kind of complicated stuff that we've kind of figured out along the way. And the third pillar is what I consider platform moderation. That's the stuff most of y'all I feel like on this call would care about because you're trying to build apps. And platform moderation in app protocol, I find is actually, I don't know, it's now an area where I'm thinking a lot through it. And so for me, at least the way that I mentally think about it is that there's lots of different places where the data is stored, right? Like there's folks talking about the app is who's responsible. Like who's responsible is actually a great question because from
Yep.
previous conversations that we had, it was my understanding that like the PDS is responsible for taking down illegal and harmful content. Also, I would imagine also responding to the feds, like you mentioned, Ted. The relay, depending on how much data you're storing, potentially as well. Our relay stores just 1 day's worth of data and then it gets deleted out after 24 hours. The one that we're running, it is capable to store more, but we're just storing 1 day backfill. And so I don't think the relay is that much of a liability or concern. It'll all be gone. Like everything just is gone after a day. Then there's an app if you are running an app view, right? Because all the data from the PDS is then if it fits your lexicon, yeah, the relay only, yeah, it doesn't cache media. That is a good point.
Which, from a legal perspective, super good.
Yeah, yeah. Whatchamacallit? And so the app is anything that matches your lexicon, it is storing a copy of. Um, Archival relay is basically the same thing. It's how long you're storing the data for. And so it's still never storing the blobs, it's just storing the records. So we store a day worth of records. We actually Udkars, who's been working on the mod relay, which is doing the same thing for records, but with labels. He's actually able to store all the labels for every Ozone instance that ever ran since 2023. Previously. So that is an archival mod relay. But yeah, but it's just labels, so there's nothing there. Thanks for the jazz hands, Brian. Yeah, if you're running an app, then you have the same, I would imagine you have the same, but probably even more responsibility. So for me, so there's a question here about the client that we're running. So the goal with the client that we're hoping to launch, that we've been fundraising for, is to make all of these things that we've set up now as a default. So make the Black Sky trending feed the default feed instead of Discover. Make the Black Sky PDS, which is unfortunately not a risky implementation. It's the same, it's the Blue Sky TypeScript implementation that we have running at blacksky.app. Have that be the default, but then and rename it so that it's not you're joining Blue Sky Social, you're joining Black Sky Algorithms. So make that the default for new users that sign up. And then there's a question about liability of if I'm a bit on the fence. I think at this point where I'm at is like I would like both the Blue Sky. I'll have to figure out how to make it work, but have both the Blue Sky moderation and the Black Sky moderation as the default for the client, as opposed to just having the Black Sky moderation. There was a concern there because sometimes like Black users speak up about racism and then it gets labeled as intolerance. But I think for safety reasons and various concerns, I think having Blue Sky's moderation as the default makes a lot of sense for right now. And then it's a client, right? And so the clients is really just tapping into to different app views. And so in theory, like we could keep building out our client and start pulling in stuff from other apps. And so, yeah, I think in this distributed system where liability stands for various different pieces, I'd be curious to hear different folks, but I've thought of it at the very granular level. There's all these different places where data is copied, cached. It's the origin point, it's the destination point. It is viewed through a client that is really just proxying requests. Yeah, that's kind of the gambit of all the different moderation stuff in my head.
Thank you so much for all of that. And that's super useful and I think a helpful framing for a pile of these things. And I think just on that last point, as somebody who's run platforms before, right? Actually, one of the problems with all of this stuff is there are different legal standards for different type of stuff. right? And so CSAM, for example, is just a thing you can't touch. If you have it, you have an obligation to report it. You have an obligation for how you handle that, and that's why, for example, relays not touching blobs, fucking great. That means you don't have to worry about touching that. If you run anything that touches blobs, you potentially have obligation and liability around that, and you need to know who you're connecting with, or like you're running a risk if you're not thinking about it. Which, you could do for some period of time if you're a North American. I know that, one of the conversations we had last time was there are a bunch of folks who are very skittish about trying to run things without having a framework or an umbrella to connect with. That's different than handling IP stuff, right? And things that are civil actions, and like, so you get a nasty gram from Disney's lawyer or whatever. What are you going to do about that? How long can you do something about that? What's the consequences, right? Thinking through some of those pieces. And then, of course, within the European context, the GDPR and the DSA set different requirements. And some of that also has to deal with scale and how they classify you. And that gets kind of gnarly. And then the EU is kind of crazier too, because some of this depends on the EU is considered a single block, but actually you have to pick a regulator that you're going to work with in a particular national jurisdiction, and then there's a particular regulator in that country that has oversight over what you're doing. So like at small scale, some of it doesn't matter, but you got to think about like that. That's why Robin was pointing out, like once you hit a certain scale, you start to have legal obligations, and like individual users could sue you if you are not handling their appeals in accordance with the DSA or whatever. So just as a heads up around that. Yeah. Oh, right. Yes. And of course, Ofcom in the UK. And so like that's kind of the issue with the patchwork here and the sort of facilities that we need to build. And it's super interesting hearing about like how y'all have used Ozone. And I think talking about Ozone development further, I mean, like I assume that the Black Sky team, the Blue Sky team have been talking about how that changes over time. It's worth mentioning that like trust and safety is just a war of attrition, full stop. And so I was curious, actually, Rudy, in your case, how has your policy evolved? I mean, one thing, having worked for companies before, like you got to write down all your policy documents and how you're following those rules. And that pertains to the way that users can appeal stuff, because within the scope of the DSA, users can appeal relative to the standards that you have set, and you have to have those written down in a place that users can see it. And those are the basis for appeals. And if you're not following that, that's when, again, they can sue you. But again, for like community project and things like that, it's interesting to see like, all this stuff evolves over time. Policies get updated. Some of these are novel cases that you've never seen before. Rudy, I'm curious how many documents y'all have at this point around the policies for Black Sky, for example.
So we Daniel Lugone's call just helped launch our docs.blackskyweb.xyz, which has the goal of both educating users on all the stuff that we've built, but then I think eventually becomes like a place where we put those like public moderation policies. So we don't have anything, well, as of right now, we don't have anything public on our policies besides just the labels that are in the account. Internally, we have a standard operating procedure guidelines that we are constantly having conversations about as it pertains to like, yeah, when do you label? So going into that, we have various different levers that we pull when it comes to moderation, because remember, there's curation is moderation and there's the labels that we apply. And so depending on the kind of infraction, let's say, we're either going to just apply no labels, either do nothing, right? Baseline, do nothing. This is out of scope. This is not, maybe it's unsubstantiated, whatever the case may be. Sexual content, for example, we generally do not label. We allow it to be reported because it could be sexual content showing up in the Black Sky feed, which has not been labeled by the Blue Sky like AI moderators, because we combine labels with the feed. That may not be super obvious. So if something is labeled by Blue Sky, we'll exclude that from the feed. We're listening to the fire hose of their labels. That's part of why I wanted to build the mod relay, so that we can get we can mix and match labels from different services and have that be able to be used in our algorithm for surfacing content so that we are making sure that we remove certain kinds of content. For example, it becomes, if we just listen to Andra's X-Block labeler, it becomes really easy to just exclude Twitter screenshots from the feed without, needing to rely on alt text, for example, or doing our own thing. So boom. So, but there are times where like I think their AI just like for whatever the body types that are showing in the black sky feed, it is not catching. And so then people manually report those and then we take actions on those. And I have Ozone doesn't alert. Well, Ozone is not opinionated about how you get alerted. So we set up a script that sends an email to all of our moderators. And I have the logic for it to show like, is this post showing it? Is this is reported to us. It's nothing to do with Black Sky. That's a certain email thread. It's showing in the Black Sky feed. That's a different email thread. This came from the auto reported service. That's a different email thread. And then like there's a special one for like Kiwi Farms, right? Because that was like a thing for the winter time. And also there's complicated moderation issues that we're still not sure how to resolve. I just want to like note those because there's really sophisticated situations where there's like mass stalking going on the platform where like people don't even make a post. They just like make a grotesque profile and crazy handle and then they just follow a bunch of people. And like that's like and then they tag us and it's like, can you block this person's IP address? And it's like, well, now I have to explain like the way the architecture of everything. Not really. Can't do anything about that. Um, uh, but yeah, back on the levers that we pull. So it could be so we're getting these alerts from these emails, and then we have the queues. Um, Ozone now has like all this filtering that you can do based on report. That you can use tags better and stuff like that. So that's really cool. We try to do like oldest reports first. I asked the mods to do that. Like go through the queue that way so you could do the sorting in that way. And then we're trying to decide like, okay, do nothing because this is falls out of our scope, or when I handle the like stuff that's in the feed myself. Like I just as soon as I see those emails, I take care of those because they can't like the mods can't modify the database like to remove a post from the feed, right? So that's something that I do. Um, but then there's like do nothing, label the individual post, maybe label maybe one or more labels. Another a challenge that I find is that you're allowed to, anyone can just use hide or warn, and those are very intrusive methods. So there's just guidelines that we have around when you can use hide or warn. Because for folks like warn will, if a user is subscribed to your label service and you put a warn label on something, it'll show like it'll always show a warn tag regardless of their personal settings of moderation settings. If someone puts a hide on it, they're completely blocked from seeing that content. There's no way around it. They have to unsubscribe from your labeler to see that. And if they're using your client and your moderation service is locked in, there's no way to unsubscribe from that. So if Blue Sky puts a hide on an account, that account, and you're using the Blue Sky client, there's no way for you to see that account, essentially. So we are very careful about, or I try to like give strict guidance. We have specific guidance around hide and warn. And then we have guidance around like when you label a post or account with anti-Black harassment. And then we also have a shared block list called the green list, which, it's on the Black Sky account. People can subscribe to it and block all the accounts on the list. We usually save that for pretty, we basically have what amounts for us to, up until us having our own PDS, what amounts to essentially deleting an account. Like if we
Yep.
put you on the block list and we ban you from TV, which is another feature that we have that prevents users from seeing the feed, maybe even throw a hide or a warn label on your account. That's the closest we can get to deleting another person's account on another PDS. And so we've had lots of conversations about that around like what oh yeah, I don't want to monopolize time, but like
No, you're good.
um
Darius was just saying. There we go.
what under what circumstance do we take it that far, right? Like there was we've had conversations where like, you know, some folks we just have a conversation about that as a team to try
Yeah.
to like, and then we try to like update our guidelines. Like some folks may think if they say this one thing, boom, take their whole account down. Like they shouldn't even be on the internet. And then some of us are like, well, you know, they only did this one time and it doesn't seem that egregious. Like I can think of worse things someone could say, so we should label this post. And so we've tried to get really locked down around like you label a post if it's an individual thing, it seems out of place. You look at their account. This all takes time though to figure out. But like
Yeah.
if it doesn't seem like a pattern, you label the whole account if it seems like a pattern. And if it's egregious enough off the rip, or if it's an egregious pattern displayed, then it's like then we take it to ban from TV, green list. That's kind of where we're at. So we have all that written down, as well as our moderation compensation policy and stuff like that. And we've evolved it at least 3 different times over the course of the we've been doing moderation since November. So what is that? 7 or 8 months of moderation. We've changed we've updated our policy 3 times
And you said you got
based
about
on
9
feedback from the
moderators, right?
mods. Yep.
Yeah. So I mean, like this is one of those things about like I think this is good to give people a sense of what the scope is and what the human um commitment is to both the policy and the operations and the tools. And so I mean, like talking about this war of attrition, I think is important because it's like actually the tools become super important for how quickly folks can respond, how many people you need in order to be able to do some of this stuff, and where you can change what the scope of the work is. Because like, and just to say this out loud, right? Like there is no solution to trust and safety, no like global optimum that you can like do once and then you're done, right? All of this stuff is constantly evolving. People are complicated. This is governance fundamentally. And so like knowing which things are human problems is really important, which things are technology problems or where the two of those things touch. Juliet and Andrew are here too. I'm super curious about what y'all are thinking about when it comes to that tooling side of things, because like some of this is about extending reach. People always talk about like AI tools and like how that's going to change how the stuff works. And it's like, well, some of it, right? So how are y'all thinking about this and the sorts of tools that you're thinking about for building new apps?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name's Juliet. Use she, her pronouns. I am based in New York. I'm the head of product at Roost, which stands for Robust Open Online Safety Tools. Just a quick bio, just so people know my context. Before I joined Roost, which is a nonprofit, I was in the tech industry for 10 years. I started off as a moderator, did customer service as well, worked at Tinder doing moderation there, and then I was Snapchat's first trust and safety product manager. So I built out all the user reporting flows, all the internal tools, automated detection. I then led the safety product team at Grindr. So I've had a lot of experience dealing with just like a lot of text-based abuse, plus short form video abuse and like image abuse too. Oh, and then I was at Google doing like anti-spam abuse on like Google Drive and Gmail and stuff. So on Roof's side, what we're doing is we're currently executing our product roadmap, which is focused on safety tooling and moderation tooling. We are working with Blue Sky, but we're not building specifically and only for the AT protocol. I still say AT protocol. I know people say app protocol, but I'm going to go with AT. But yeah, so our current projects right now, we're thinking about tooling is like, what are kind of like the core safety infrastructure that people need to do tools, both for community moderators and like more centralized like platform moderation. So one is like, you know, similar to Ozone, like a review tool, a queue-based review tool. So we're actually going to be open sourcing one later this year. It's going to be a pretty sophisticated, very mature review tool, very similar to Ozone, but kind of like super customizable, able to be deployed via a Docker container. You can set up, so it's just labeling things. You can also set it up if you want to look at kind of like media. It's also been used by prior users who kind of prototyped it in like a chat and messaging context. So that's really helpful. I think Rudy was talking about it earlier. Like a lot of text-based abuse is really difficult to really kind of like make decisions on because you lack a lot of the context. So it will intuitively include like bits and parts of the conversation and highlight the parts that have either been reported or have been flagged. What we're also planning to launch with is built-in integration. So like if you're using any third-party tools, like if you're using Hive, if you're using Thorn Safer, if you're using Recognition, if you're using the Perspective API, those integrations will already have like webhooks built into this review tool. So our hope is that, it's usable by just like, like platforms that are not on the app protocol, Now I'm switching the app, not confusing at all. But also,
What?
you know, we want to make sure that it's interoperable and usable by anyone building on the AT protocol. That includes Blue Sky. That also includes, you know, like Flashes, Sparks, like anyone who's building on it. So we're hoping to integrate that with like the Firehose, and so that it will support, you know, blobs and, you know, the actual like metadata that comes with it too. The good thing about our review tool too is it's already integrated with like NECMEC's reporting API, which means that if you register as an electronic service provider and you have access to that reporting API, you can enter your API key and you have that review flow to directly report things to NECMEC. We're hopeful that this can serve like a lot of different use cases, just because like you can use it for labeling, you could use it for like content moderation, you could use it for like doing quality checks of stuff. Use it to be like, you know, is this a bird? It is great, a bird. The other thing too is like it has kind of like industry standard best practices when it comes to moderator wellness. That's something that's super important to us, especially for me as a former moderator who still has PTSD from being a moderator. So it comes with the ability to kind of like set your own blurring scale on the content. You know, there's a lot of research, I can share it later, that shows that kind of like to a certain degree, blurring it helps it not be burned into your brain. Same with making it grayscale. So making content that might be gore, maybe violent, making it grayscale makes it not kind of like be retained in your brain as much. But again, like these are all sliders because everyone's got their own preference. If you set it too blurry, it actually you end up spending more time looking at it, which can have the adverse effect. But prior to us launching and like releasing this open source, we're actually going to be releasing a browser extension that you can use on any website and that provides those wellness resources. So basically, you can select the images that you want it to run on, or if you run it on like all images on a specific URL, and it'll have that same kind of like grayscale slider, blur slider, and then adds a grid as well, which also helps kind of like people identify like what's bad and not have to look at like the whole image, which can sometimes be helpful too. The other tool that we're working on is, you know, it's a partnership with one of our tech company partners who's actually donating their private internal tool that they've been using for safety and moderation to Roost. And we are in the process of open sourcing that. So that's more of like a rules engine investigation tool. It allows you to kind of consume like real-time events through a data pipeline, and then you can actually kind of like it's a query-based tool. So it helps you find like patterns in spam, patterns in like if in harassment or doxing campaigns as well. You can find different clusters of bad actors, you can find anomalies, and then set rules to kind of take actions on them. Again, we're building all of our tools to be like widely available and usable in all platforms. So the MVP is not necessarily designed to work with the AT protocol, but that interoperability is on our roadmap. Let me check the chat really quick.
Cool.
Also, I've been talking a bunch.
Oh no, this is great, and thank you so much for this context. I mean, like basically, I think it's worth talking about the things that we've mentioned, which is like the community things that we're building here. There's tooling pieces, and then there's the infrastructure that already exists and is working through the network. So, like, Brian, have y'all gotten feedback about Ozone? Are y'all thinking about this? Are there ways that people can get involved in building this out more?
It's a hard question. I mean, we've been talking about it internally for more than a year, that it's a, you know, funny place. I mean, we have the two wolves, like we really need to prioritize our large moderation team that has urgent needs. And then obviously it's, you know, also building something that works for the rest of the network is important. And then there's like emergent teams like Black Sky, which are like also a team, right? Like we started adding all these features for like having, you know, different roles of moderator using the tool, or having, you know, having tools to prevent people from overriding some actions or being able to override some actions and stuff like that, which are all kind of like not probably like potentially not the highest priority for a very small team. But as soon as you start getting a larger team, they are important features. We also need to spend a lot of time building out regulatory compliance features. And so those there's just like a stack, like we really want to make it easier to use and easier to set up, easier to install, more legible. The UI is just like, has predictably gotten quite complicated over time and stuff like that. But, you know, at the end of the day, it's like, if there's a law we need to comply with in 2 weeks, that's what we're going to be working on. To some sense, that helps everyone, right? Everyone gets, if you needed to comply with those laws, now you get that feature to do
Yeah.
it. So there's a lot of juggling. There's also a couple. Anyways, so I have, it's kind of like a non-answer. Like I'd say, a fork wouldn't be that bad. We also have, there's a front end and back end component of Ozone. A lot of the comments we get are like just UI things, and in theory, someone could build a new front end UI, but keep using the Ozone back end. Yeah, I mean, at some point we might really have to scale it, and that would probably be a breaking point, right? If we need to switch to a different storage backend, then that's probably the fork in the road where we would end up having internal versus external tooling.
So the thing that I think is interesting about this and this conversation, right? Like, describing this space as a war of attrition, I think kind of gives a sense of like, hey, I'm an indie dev. I want to do a thing, right? Like, there's a step function definitely for this, and how do we either help people build ladders, or what's the thing that needs to exist in order to help? And I think this is the context of the like, what would a European moderation service look like? How might we start with that, and how would that be different than doing community moderation and kind of growing, which is one of the reasons why I think Black Sky is such an interesting and unique example, because there are also other teams who want to do some of the stuff, like the North Sky team. I think a journalism focused thing maybe wouldn't be terrible either. But like, how do we think about helping people get to these next steps, and what are the questions that we've got to answer, or where we need to kind of come together on this?
To me, there's two places that we're kind of like really lacking that are separate from Ozone as well. One is like, you just can't do that much in the app, right? Like that's a little off. It's funny that you can't, especially when people are getting started with stuff. It's funny that you can't like create. You can imagine in the Blue Sky app being able to like log in to an Ozone instance or something like that, and then now you're in like moderator mode in the app, and you could label things directly or take actions directly within the Blue Sky app. That would just like, I think for a lot of people that would be quite helpful. That's like doesn't really have much to do with you could kind of set this up where like if you report it, it just takes effect. Like if you report something, it immediately gets taken down. There's like some hacks you can kind of come up with around that, but having something a little more legible would kind of make sense. And then a piece that's missing is like a piece that we've known for a long time is missing is like how to do that. Just hasn't come up. It hasn't become a priority yet because it hasn't like happened, but like moderating self-hosted PDS instances, and in particular doing takedowns on instances that are remote, and then having collaborations. Like Blue Sky is in the awkward position of running a prominent relay, running a lot of PDS instances, having the client app, and running a large moderation service. So when we take certain actions like account takedowns or other things like that, it just kind of happens across the board, and that's not distributed. That's not like the vision of the whole thing. We've been pretty careful to make sure, like we do some weird things, like we do post moderation almost all the time, right? We let people post stuff and then we moderate it. We don't try to moderate, which from a like platform perspective, like maybe doesn't make sense or isn't the right way to do it. But we've stuck to that because it means that content coming from someone else's PDS is treated the exact same way as content coming from our PDS, right? If we can't prior moderate what's happening on someone else's instances in the network. On the other hand, like almost certainly there's going to be cases, especially around things like CSAM or other legal content, where we have a large moderation team, we can react relatively quickly on extreme content. It would probably be nice if people could delegate, if people opted into it, they could delegate to our team on their own infrastructure that like, oh, okay, Blue Sky is telling us that this is like really bad. We should at least like quarantine it right now. And so that being able to kind of negotiate that kind of relationship and having the APIs specify for how that kind of thing works, that's a missing piece that we definitely have to, I think that's like even called out in the protocol specifications, that there's like a hole there that we need to fill, and that shouldn't be super, super complicated. The last thing I would say around that, so like another place that's not Ozone to hook in a little bit of moderation is the PDS account management interface. So we, at least in our PDS implementation, we started building out. Now you have like a bit of a web interface that you can log into the PDS and do things. And like an obvious next step there would be like, if you're the administrator of the PDS, you could take basic actions on the PDS. So you could like take accounts down on that PDS without having to set up. Like the vision for that is that you'd set up something like Ozone that you could do it separately. So you could be doing multiple PDSs at the same time or something like that. But like as justice right now, you have to use a command line tool to do it. And that's just like not great. So those are kind of, I think, some of the priorities from us.
Cool. Thanks. Rudy? And raise your hand if
Yeah.
you got questions or anything like that.
I just want to ask Brian, because just to clarify, because like if you run an Ozone instance and you run a PDS, you can delegate moderation from the PDS to your own Ozone instance, right? But you're saying like, go ahead.
That's the vision. I don't think that I can recall. I don't know if we really have that wired up in a way that anyone else can do that other than us. You know, there's the change account status lexicon endpoint, and you can give the. I don't know. I'd have to go look. I haven't looked at the Ozone source code, what we did with that. The intent was to add another Ozone event type that's like an infrastructure takedown, and it would have like, are you taking this down from the relay? Are you taking it down from the PDS? So this is like getting a little more into the weeds, and I think we never quite shipped that in a general purpose way. So we want to be able to delegate things like have a PDS delegate takedown power to an Ozone instance, but I can't remember if you can actually kind of do that right now. The other aspect, yeah. Maybe you've done it? It works.
Oh no, I was just gonna say I just set up the Black Sky app, Ozone, PDS, migrated my account over to it, and so the next thing for me to try out, because in the environment variables you can say which moderation service you delegate to. So I'll try it out. Let you know.
We should, yeah. It's as soon as anyone runs into that, we need to get it working. So it sounds like you were just now running into it, and so we really need to get that working.
Rudy, did you end up using the ATProto airport or Goat for the migration?
Airport broke. It hit a 504 timeout, and then it left a ghost account on the PDS. And then I tried the bad way to delete the account, and that caused more errors that were unclear. And then I found out, okay, I could make a fake. I found a hacky way to like really delete the account, and then I had to do like 3 migration attempts with Goat.
Okay.
But then I had the automated one did not work. I had to do the manual migration with Goat for my account.
Okay, good to know. Yeah, and that's like excellent follow-up from the last time we talked. We should talk about that with everybody again. Sebastian?
I tried to use Ozone to do, like, from what I remember, it didn't allow infrastructure takedowns to be sent to your PDS. But so I think what you're saying, Brian, is true, that some of those pieces aren't quite automatically hooked up.
Cool. Thanks, Dave. Toss it over to Sebastian.
Yeah, I got a question for Brian. You said you're doing the moderation retrospectively, like through the app, like people report it, and because otherwise you couldn't moderate PDSs that people self-hosted. What if you couldn't you moderate in between the relay and your app view, at least through auto moderation, like AI-based analysis of all the data that flows through and ends up in the app view?
Yeah, technically you could attempt to do that. So you could try to have a service. You could have something, you know, you could have a pipe in between content coming out of the relay and going out to indexing in the app view. And you would not let anything through the pipe that hadn't been scanned in some sense, right? Engineering that thing would be pretty complicated because it could like bloat up. And then also anyone else in the network using other stuff would already see the content, right? Like that works for your app view, but it doesn't work for the other stuff. But yeah, it's an architecture that's
well, you would only create you would only create labels, right? Like I wasn't imagining like blocking the content from reaching the app view, but creating automatic labels on the side, you know, for the moderation service.
There's a lot of possibilities. That's still after, like the user has still posted the content to the network, right? So it's like not being displayed in your app quite yet, but it's odd. We do actually do this for video, for instance. Like when you upload video, we don't push the video to the CDN until we've run automated moderation on the video, because video is just like kind of high stakes. And then also video has a delay already. Like it needs to be transcoded. You have like, there's all this, like everyone's used to the video upload taking a while. Whereas if we did this on images, it would be like this kind of janky thing. But I would still frame all of that as post. You're not preventing the post. You're reacting to the post, and you might not be, you're not displaying it until you've scanned it, but you're still like the post is still out there in the network.
I think that I'm going to stop the recording now. We can keep going till the half hour. Thank you everybody for coming and chatting about all this stuff. I think there's a lot of directions that we can take this to next, and we'll be. I think we're going to continue on a 2-week cadence. I know that we bumped this a week for Fedi Forum and the like. So we'll see everybody in 2 weeks, and we will have announcements for the next topic very soon. So thank you everybody, and let's move to open questions.